Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I want to tell you something tonight. DEZARN and I are not your typical political candidates. And I want to emphasize this fact and talk about why it is so wonderful. So let me begin by saying this. Throughout the years, growing up as a young man, something that I've heard quite often is the fact that the majority of people, in my experience, have seemed to hate politicians. And for several reasons. They think that all politicians lie. All politicians change their mind whenever it's convenient for them to get reelected. That in fact, all politicians care about is re-election. That no politicians can ever be trusted. That there's just this group of people that are always going to screw over the entire country, that all they care about is themselves, etc., etc. And this is something that has actually had a profound impact on me, because as a young guy hearing all this all the time, I just thought, you know, it really sucks to live in a country where most people hate their representatives. And this was, of course, before the time when I decided that I wanted to be a politician. But this was in the background of my mind, so I was always seeking out politicians that I thought were respectable. And really, it amounted to Ron Paul and Rand Paul, and a few others just throughout history, like Washington and Lincoln, and to a degree, Ronald Reagan. Anyway, the point here that I want to make is that throughout the years, a sense of sadness and disappointed developed within me, realizing not only that most people hate politicians, but that as you actually learn more about the majority of politicians, it's extremely disappointing, and for a wide array of reasons. I think the number one reason being that they just don't level with their constituents. In my opinion, that's the number one problem. They don't level with anybody. They have groups, in my opinion, that they cater to. And each politician picks their group. They say, we want to go out and protect corporations, or we want to go out and protect minorities, or we want to go out and protect, I don't know, this group of people that claim to be discriminated against, etc. And so it creates this culture, as I've learned, it creates a culture of classism, it creates a culture of racism, it creates a culture of sexism, and it creates just a culture of group versus group versus group, and the politicians representing those groups. And that's something that I don't like. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that. But what truly makes me what truly makes me not your typical candidate, and what, in my opinion, makes DEZARN not one of your typical candidates? First of all, I really always just wanted to be a writer. When I was younger, I wanted to be a movie star, actually. But then as I grew older, writing was more my thing. I loved poetry, in particular. I work at a grocery store. So, I'm not a manager at a grocery store. I am a cashier. I watch the front end, I watch the cashier sometimes, and sometimes I work at customer service. I make $9.15 an hour presently. So I don't come from a lot of money, and I don't work this high-end job. I'm not in a situation that allows for me to spend a lot of money on a political campaign. So right away, you know that I'm not one of your typical candidates. My running mate, DEZARN, he runs the cafeteria at Princeton University. He isn't extraordinarily wealthy. He's a middle-class guy, and he works a lot of hours. A lot of hours. Busy man. Neither of us are your typical candidates. Neither of us are guys working decent paying jobs with a lot of connections. We don't come from connections, is one major point that I want to make. And neither of us are starting with a lot of money at all. And also, neither of us have really all the time in the world to devote to this campaign. Now, I find that very interesting because the folks we're running against have very decent paying jobs. Both the incumbents, the Democrats, and that's Linda Greenstein, she makes $59,000 a year, just putting it out there. And Wayne D'Angelo and Dan Benson, they make $49,000 a year. And obviously they already have a lot of influence as incumbents. You may know that the Republicans were running against, well, Peter Verso ran a bank. He comes from a lot of money. And one of his running mates, Steve Cook, was his chief of staff. And of course you have Ronald Haas. And these guys come from money. Whatever. I don't care. That's good for them that they have money. I'm glad that they have a lot of money. I don't persecute people because they have a lot of money, or they have a little money, or they have a moderate amount of money. The point that I'm just trying to make is that DEZARN and I don't come from a lot of money, and we don't have a lot of time. And yet, despite all that, we managed to talk about the issues more than the folks we're running against. We've covered more issues than the folks we're running against. And somehow, if you actually track the campaign that DEZARN and I are running, and track the campaigns that the Democrats are running and the Republicans are running on their websites, it actually seems like DEZARN and I are doing a lot more. So, in no way are we your typical candidates. Obviously, there's also the fact that DEZARN and I are independent, libertarian-minded candidates. This obviously distinguishes us in a major way from the Republicans and the Democrats, who are barely distinguished from one another. What does it mean when we say that we're independent candidates? A lot of times, people who are independent candidates come across as crazy people. They have these bizarre, wild, out there ideas that they sound like these great long-term goals, maybe 200 years down the road. Or maybe they're really just, they're weird, or bad ideas. They're fringe politicians, or fringe candidates. Well, DEZARN and I aren't like that. It just so happens that we believe we have better policies in mind for the state of New Jersey than the Democrats do, or the Republicans do. We're not associated with either political party. We don't answer to them. Nobody tells us, well, we can go on the internet